Hola gente, acá estamos tratando de resolver los problemas técnicos. Espera, ahí de vuelta. A ver si podemos hacerlo por acá. ¿Cómo va gente? Estaba charlando con Clara y con Brannon a ver si podemos resolver este problema técnico y a ver si lo podemos hacer en vivo, porque la joda es hacerlo en vivo, obviamente. Así que bueno, eso mismo. ¿Cómo va? Ahí está Clara. Ahí se nos une.
¿Cómo
¿Cómo
va?
va? ¿Todo
¿Cómo
bien?
va?
Sí,
¿Cómo
sí,
va?
ahí vamos.
Sí,
Sí, esto ya había pasado,
qué ansiedad.
pero con Darío, a Darío le había pasado lo mismo, que no pudimos hacer el vivo la otra vez porque a él le saltaba algo en las... el Instagram tiene un tema con las actualizaciones que ya me está... Bueno, es todo.
No sé,
Así
yo ya
que
estoy
vamos.
feliz. Estoy feliz de haber hablado con Brandon, por lo menos face to face en el Zoom que hicimos, que duró 5 minutos. Pero ya está. Tacho algo de la bucket list, como diciendo, bueno, ya está. Hablé por Zoom con Brannon y todo bien. Ya está, somos amigos.
Sí, ahora estoy esperando a ver que me escriba por el
Qué
Instagram,
leyenda,
así.
¿no? Porque para mí es un lujo, honestamente, poder hablar hoy con uno de los escritores más icónicos que hay hoy en día en lo que es el cine y las series, el sci-fi, porque obviamente él estuvo metido en muchos de los capítulos de Star Trek y, digamos, él escribió una serie que quizás nadie la conoce y la conozco solo yo porque soy re nerd, pero escribió una historia que se llama Terranova, que es la historia de la supervivencia del hombre solamente está en el pasado. Entonces lo que hacen los humanos es crear una máquina del tiempo para viajar al pasado, a la época de los dinosaurios, para poder sobrevivir, o sea, generar un loop de tiempo con la existencia. Muy sci-fi, muy el estilo de lo que, digamos, la serie era súper, tenía unos efectos que eran súper novedosos para ese entonces, quizás si la vemos ahora queda medio vieja la serie, pero me encantaba la idea, como el loop de tiempo de que de verdad el ser humano para sobrevivir, que ahí está Brannon, eh, para, para sobrevivir, que el ser humano necesite ir al pasado a encontrar, es una cosa maravillosa, ¿no? El loop de tiempo. I'm
Yo
trying to
estoy
get
invitando.
on.
Ahí va.
Yes, there we could do it.
Yeah,
Thank you for your patience and telling me what to do.
no,
And
that's
you know,
okay.
you
Oh, by
also
the way,
you were right. My Wi-Fi was turned off, so
That was the case.
you were right every step of the way, and I appreciate your help.
Yes, we are already on the Twilight Zone.
Okay,
Just
cool.
getting
yeah,
into it.
an interesting thing, Brandon. Clara was saying that she was very excited to talk to you because she admires you a lot. So I say I have the honor to talk to Brandon just for Zoom, and I'm happy. So
Yeah. I'm a
There's
huge fan. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I watched a lot of your shows, the ones that you wrote, and I was speaking to the public about the one Terra Nova that you wrote.
which one?
Some of the episodes,
Oh,
Terra Nova. Here we say like
oh,
Terra Nova. How do you say the
yeah,
translation?
yeah, the dinosaur show. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was quite interesting the way that humanity just survives but going back on time. Like there is nothing else in the future but the past.
That's
So
right.
that is a very interesting subject.
Yes,
Very,
it's very Twilight Zone.
yeah, very Twilight Zone. Was about to say that.
It would be
Uh,
would be like the ending of a Twilight Zone, where the premise was someone created a time. It's an apocalyptic future. Someone has created a time machine, and they finally get it to work. And the ending is they're back in the Cretaceous era.
yeah, and very similar to the one that I'm a huge fan of. The third from the sun episode, and it's very similar. It's like some people are trying to escape from Earth an apocalyptic event, and suddenly they just race onto a spaceship and they get on, and their destination is Earth. So that is really
Yeah,
a tricky one. I'm a huge fan of Richard Matheson. I don't know if you read him,
of course,
but
of
I
course.
read all of his books, and I think that he is like, I think that Rod Serling and Richard Matheson are like fathers together of the Twilight Zone, because there are so many stories of Richard Matheson there, and it's a very interesting era for the sci-fi, and the vision that people had in the 50s of the future was something that was really interesting to watch nowadays, because maybe they thought that we were going to be on some place that we are not, and it's very interesting.
Although I would say that they were they, they weren't wrong about a lot of things. You know,
No, they weren't.
I don't remember the name of the episode um, where the Earth is on, where there's a horrible heat. The Earth is in the middle
Yes,
of
the one they were going through the sun.
well, no, it's I'm trying to find the title. They're in the middle of not a heat wave, it's called the midnight sun.
Yes, because the Earth is spinning towards the sun, and they're
Yeah,
gonna just crash onto the sun.
but it's kind of like a climate change thing. It's very much what's happening now, you know. Um,
Melting oil paintings. That's
yeah,
right. Like there was like a fountain, and there was like this contrast of the paintings that they did and how they melted in the heat, and all the paintings were of cold places, cold, fresh places, like in contrast with what the characters were living, and it was really beautiful.
The other day we were talking with this journalist Dario, and it's interesting. The Twilight Zone, the whole episode, like the 156 episode, is like an encyclopedia of sci-fi and fantasy for the future. I mean, if you can track down every story, even Stephen King, all the sci-fi writers, all the series, back to all those episodes. I was thinking in the story with Zavala about the killing doll. Well, you have Chucky, then the guy, he was hunted by the technology, Stephen King, Christine, Needful Things. I think there is an episode where you have a guy that gives you just the object you need. So it's amazing how now, the other day we were saying, like, it is possible to find new ideas after all this.
it's a very influential show to I think still to this day. It's very influential to a lot of writers, and it's one of the reasons. I mean, certainly I was already into writing when I started watching The Twilight Zone, but it definitely was it's my favorite show, and it definitely had the most influence on me. And it was the first time I became aware of writing a writer for television, kind of this auteur, Rod Serling, and I had that book by Mark Scott Zicree called The Twilight Zone Companion. And I would sit in front of the TV and read about the behind the scenes while I would watch the episodes. And I really became aware of who wrote what episode. You know, Richard Matheson wrote Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, among others. And I had Charles Beaumont, and Rod Serling, of course, wrote probably close to 100 out of the 150. But it really made me aware of the quality of writing that television could have, and that there was someone behind it. There was a visionary.
Actually, Rod Serling had to defend his show because there were some. I researched, and there were some problems in the middle. There was a lot of there was the golden era of the television in theory, but in practical terms, it was very difficult for the show to survive in that era, because sometimes all the sponsors, they decide to leave, so now they have to change the dynamic. And I remember a quote by Rod Serling that before the Twilight Zone, he tried to write about different social issues. racial issues, different, and it was difficult to talk about them. And he realized that the best way to talk about social issues was through sci-fi. And he says, there are things that cannot be told by Republicans nor Democrats, but they can be told by Martians. So that's the famous quote of Rod Serling.
Well, that's true, and Gene Roddenberry knew that as well. That you could explore controversial issues that no one would touch through science fiction metaphor, and you could approach the subject matter more obliquely, and that's precisely what Serling did.
Yes, and one of the greatest examples is, for example, the episode of Monsters on Maple Street and the racial issue. I think that is the beauty of the show also, because there are some, like, I think that there is a lot of Lovecraft there, a lot of cosmic horror, that maybe it was a very hot theme at the time. But there were also like social events happening, and those social events needed to be like shown in a way. But that was a very difficult time for being real in certain stuff. So I think that it was a very good way of showing with metaphors what was going on around the world. And so that was the beauty. And there was another one about the darkest night, I think, black, the color of the night. I think it was that there is such relevant episodes, but they are not only beautiful because they have all this sci-fi and horrors, cosmic horror, but they also have this social issue that is behind them. And that is...
Yeah, well, that was part of Rod Serling's driving creative vision. Was he was a humanitarian. His stories are deeply humanistic and have something to say or something to present, an issue to present. You even mentioned, you mentioned the episode Living Doll, about the little scary little doll. Well, that was about child abuse.
Yes, it was about child abuse.
And it's as when I saw it growing up, it was about a scary doll. But when I would rewatch the episode later in life, I'm like, oh, this really is much deeper.
It was child and also the wife. No?
The wife, domestic abuse.
Domestic abuse. I think it was more about...
And the only person able to talk about it and voice it is this doll, indirectly. It was just brilliant. And there was so much that he did. One of my favorite episodes, which I think is called Long Distance Caller, is it?
Yeah, the one about the call from the graveyard.
Yeah, it's about the little boy's grandmother who dies, and she had given him a toy phone before she died, and she starts calling him, and she's trying to, on this dumb little toy phone, you never hear her.
You never. And
she's trying to lure him to come join her. And the kid ends up drowning himself in the swimming pool, and he's dying, and the father at the end is on this dumb little phone trying to convince this voice that you don't hear not to take him. And it's a show about grief and loss. But what other show could show a child committing suicide? Like, you want to talk about a completely radical, disturbing story about a grandmother trying to take the little boy with her. That's what the show could do, because it was fantastical.
Yes.
Actually, also, I remember that after a while, I noticed certain themes on the writing. For example, in Rod Serling, I can always detect not only controversial issues, but also his personal feelings about life. There's a lot of episodes written by him where he deals with the nostalgia for the past. There's a lot of episodes of people like trying to return to the previous life. They are old and they want to be youth again, or they say, my childhood was the best time of my life. The guy who returns to the town where he grew up.
Of course, that comes out of, Serling grew up in is it Birmingham, New York? It was some small town in New York that was very bucolic. It was a perfect little childhood with a perfect town. And he had the perfect upbringing. And then he went to war.
Went to war.
And he saw horrors. And you can see many episodes deal with him trying to consolidate his childhood with the horrors he experienced in war, and trying to, can you get back to that innocence? That's a huge theme running work.
Well, actually, the pilot of the show, when he tried to sell it, was about a man that has like a vision of Pearl Harbor before it was happening. So there is the first episode. It's about the war. So, and then when the show aired and they finally said yes, because the episode was such a success, they said, okay, go ahead. And I think that was the moment where he was able to just express the horrors that he lived, besides everything that they brought about the science advance in that era. So there's a lot of things going on behind the show that made the show also I mean, such a success, because maybe it's strange when I think about it. It's strange that the Twilight Zone maybe was such a pioneer and successful show, and people, maybe you think maybe they weren't ready for that. Maybe they were ready to just watch a comedy about a family and just laugh about it. But this is something.
I was talking with a fellow writer that I've worked with named Ann Druyan, who was who grew up when the Twilight Zone was airing. She was, I think, in maybe junior high school or something like that. And she said that it was Friday night viewing, and people would come to school on Monday or go to work on Monday, and they were talking about the episodes. Like this, this show was a phenomenon. Like it was discussed, and you know, on Friday night you were watching the Twilight Zone, and it had a huge following even at the time. It was a very successful show. It was also a very, very expensive show, and an anthology show. It's, you know, you're not it's all new actors and sets and stuff every week, so it's very expensive. In fact, there was I don't remember what season it was, that they decided to not shoot on 35 millimeter film, but they moved to video, like they would shoot it like a play, like that long distance color episode I mentioned. Looks terrible. It was the season that they tried to shoot it live, kind of live on video. And it's terrible looking. It doesn't look like the show, but the writing is so good that you don't care.
Yeah, there was also the one of the lady in the hospital, like the dancer that had a premonition of her death. I think that was also taped like in video and not in. And there was another one in one of the season. I think it was the final, or in the end, they even had to add like a short film that they took from Keynes. And they said, okay, let's just add this because we cannot pay for every show that we're going to make. So
but you know what? That was called Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. And it's about the man who fantasizes he's escaping from some enemy troops, and he's at the end is that it was at the moment of his death, right?
Yes.
But that became one of the most famous episodes, because the audience didn't know that was acquired at a film festival. But it was a great episode of The Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yes, I was saying, and about the war, there's a very important episode. I remember seeing you a long time ago with Dennis Hopper, where this neo-Nazi, it's like he's like he see the presence of Adolf Hitler's ghost, and he end up like killing someone because of his influence. And I think that's a very, you know, controversial episode in a good way, in a good sense, because in a way he's trying to warn. I mean, after the war, there's a lot of issues going on the United States. So I remember that episode as one of the main, controversial and incredible. I don't know if you remember Dennis Hopper. That's why I
Yeah, yeah.
remember.
Yeah, that's another thing. It was amazing actors, up and coming actors at the time, many of whom would be Robert Redford, William Shatner was in 2 episodes.
Robert Duvall, I
Robert
think also.
Duvall.
Yeah.
But if you look at the list of actors that were on the Twilight Zone, who wanted to be on the Twilight Zone, because it was considered to be a great show, even at the time. People knew that this was amazing television.
Yeah,
Actually, in the first episode, Where is Everybody? The first episode after the pilot, there's like an introduction of Rod Serling that says this is like a show from storytellers to storytellers, something like that. It's a beautiful speech. I mean, I think that was his intention. I mean, and he's being really honest. I said, this is not going to be a show like the others. I mean, but because he knows he's going to change his.
Well, there's a fascinating interview that you can find on YouTube where Mike Wallace, a journalist from a show called 60 Minutes, and it might have been a 60 Minutes interview. Mike Wallace is interviewing Rod Serling, and of course they're smoking so much that you at times can't even see them. All the smoke. But it was before the Twilight Zone aired, and of course Rod Serling was already a very famous TV writer and very well respected. And he was talking. You can listen to Serling saying, "I'm working on this show called The Twilight Zone. We've made like 10 episodes. I have no idea if it's working." And it's a fascinating little glimpse into somebody in the thick of making the first season who just doesn't know if it's going to come together. And it's just as a writer, it's like I know that feeling that he's going through.
Well, it's very interesting because now there is this series, The Movies That Made Us, and it's all the behind the scenes of how the movies that really made us were done, and how maybe they weren't even like imagined to be done by the people who were writing them. And I think that it would be quite interesting to see how this show, for example, Rod Serling was not considered like the first option to be the host of the show. I think there was another actor that they thought that would be better hosting the show. And it would be a different show, I think, if Rod Serling wouldn't be the host of the show. So those tiny bits of like beautiful information that you get when you get the final results in your eyes, you see everything, but that is not the story that was behind everything. How was it made? How we came to see the Twilight Zone? And it's also interesting that I really wanted to talk about the impact of the show, the before and after, of how we are now in 2021, speaking about a show that aired in 1959. I mean, it's amazing because I think that nowadays horror and sci-fi was so much inspired by most of the episodes that we see on the Twilight Zone. Like we see Child's Play, we see Poltergeist, and we see shows that were one of the episodes of the Twilight Zone. And it's really interesting. Well, Star Trek was like I think that the continuity of the new era of the TV and the Twilight Zone. And I think that maybe nowadays we also have the remake that Jordan Peele is making, but I think that Black Mirror might be like the sort of Twilight Zone.
I think Black Mirror this is just my humble opinion, is the best anthology show since the Twilight Zone.
Yes.
It is.
And it is, I think it is as an offspring of the Twilight Zone. I mean.
Oh, without question. I'm sure I've never heard the creator talk about it, but there's no doubt it's evocative of the Twilight Zone, but it's also really well written and with really stories and like there are episodes of that show that I'll never forget.
Yes, and there is also this thing about the reflection of society, the reflection of what we have nowadays, and that wait a second.
That's some
Um,
someone fell down.
This is not a child's place. There's some things going on here.
No, I mentioned Star Trek, and my approach, in part, to writing Star Trek was, you know, I kind of saw an anthology show. This is just my interpretation, approach to the show, because it's a very intimidating show to write. But I thought, you know, this is an anthology show with a recurring group of characters, because you really can do anything. They can run into any kind of situation that you can imagine. So I drew my inspiration from Rod Serling. So some of my stories are very I became known for my Twilight Zone-esque stories, you know, reality bending kind of stories. And I was really thinking Rod Serling the whole time.
Really?
Actually, very
That's
interesting
amazing.
to talk about the influence of that Rod Serling took, because there wasn't. I mean, we live in, as Phil Tippett told me the other day. I mean, we live in a society we are like bound with a lot of serious audiovisual content. But back then, Rod Serling only had the pulp magazines, like short magazines with a lot of short stories of different sci-fi writers. I mean, the golden age of sci-fi, and it's very interesting to track down all this influence. Also, because I found a lot of influence of different authors, like Stevenson, for example. I remember seeing an episode about the genie who can, fulfill wishes, and that's a very Stevenson kind of way. But not only Stevenson, but a lot of and I think if you go to the past, you can also start finding also a lot of influence of the series, and that's a very interesting, work to do. This anthropology is historic. I am research.
Well, there was also the radio before.
The radio.
Serling did a lot of radio before he
really
made a
point.
TV show.
But Serling, he elevated television to a higher level. I mean,
yes,
people talk about. I mean, he really. I mean, he did it first with his television movies, like Requiem for a Heavyweight and many others. Like, he really brought a lot of respect to TV. Not that it didn't have it in some areas, but, and also remember too, you do have to give some initial credit to Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which was a very successful anthology show that came out before the Twilight Zone did, that had a host talking to you, in that case, Alfred Hitchcock. And I always wondered about the influence of that show. I've never read anything about it. But, and wait, not the Twilight Zone, nowhere even close, but some pretty great episodes in that show too. Some of which Alfred Hitchcock directed.
oh really?
Yeah. It's really interesting. But to your point, Serling was also experimenting with the medium of television. I mean, you mentioned Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which was a short film, but which is radically experimental. I think of Eye of the Beholder, about the woman who's getting reconstructive surgery on her face because she's supposedly hideous. And at the end, you see all the surgeons are the ones who are hideous. But it's a masterful piece of filmmaking, because you have to not notice that you're not seeing anybody but this woman whose face is completely bandaged. So it's actually brilliantly directed, and I think the directors of the Twilight Zone deserve a lot of credit too. It's very experimental. It's like, is this going to work? Can you do that, and not have the audience realize that what they're not seeing? And there are many episodes like of the Twilight Zone that really, and that's to a much lesser degree. In my case, I would. Inspired by that, there were some early episodes of Star Trek I did that were very experimental. There was one about a time loop where we're repeating the same events over and over again, and some people watching at home thought something was wrong with the broadcast, and and that's when I'm like, okay, so we're doing something either really right or really wrong. But again, I give all the credit to the writing on the Twilight Zone, which, as you point out, was a long time ago. And I still watch the episodes, and I'm still amazed at how good they are. You know? Now, I haven't seen the Jordan Peele one. I'm a little wary of it only because I think it's an hour, and I never liked hour-long Twilight Zones. I always got a little... They weren't as good. It was meant to be a half hour, I think, a short story.
There is, I saw the one of Jordan Peele, and I think there are some of the classics stories in the seasons, but I think that there are things about Jordan Peele that he brings from his self to the show that are interesting. But to me, I will again remark that I think that the real offspring of the Twilight Zone today is Black Mirror. So even if you make a remake called The Twilight Zone, and maybe you bring some classics like Nightmare on 20,000 Feet, I think that Black Mirror represents what I think the Twilight Zone wanted to speak about what society is. Maybe with metaphors, maybe what we are becoming, like the social phobia of certain things, how we react when we are scared, or maybe those were the issues in the 50s. Now maybe technology is one of our most serious issues, and the alienation of everyone due to technology. But I think that the way that we see the reflection of ourselves in a dark way, and maybe that really makes us uncomfortable, but at the same time we want to know what is going on, because we really want we have this creepy side that I think that we want to look at death at its face. So there is like this sort of a human identity in the way that the show is brought to us. Like the Twilight Zone is brought to us maybe in the language of the 50s. I like the way that you mentioned Hitchcock, because the first season I see a lot of Hitchcock and the tension that is used. Maybe with the one you say, the eye of the beholder, when they take away the how do you say, the face mask and the bandage, and it's like I don't know if it's 10 minutes taking out the bandage, and you're like, oh, what the fuck is on the other side of that bandage? I want to know. And that is so Hitchcock. Like, and there is another episode of A Man with a Bomb, and the moment you say Hitchcock managed the tension when he said that there is a bomb here, and there are people that need to get the bomb, and the tension is everything that's going on here in between the two things that are happening. Maybe it's just the story is just how these people get to the bomb, but the story is all the tension. Yeah. So that is.
And look, I think the Twilight Zone look, if someone came to me and said, "Will you remake the Twilight Zone?" Of course, I would go berserk. I mean, but at the same time, I'm like, the Twilight Zone really was an authorship. Rod Serling, incredible writers, a lot of them short story writers. But it was his vision, and it would kind of like being doing The Sopranos without David Chase. I mean, or any other truly kind of author-driven or showrunner-driven show. So, and that's why I think Black Mirror, that's very much Charlie Booker's vision. And I think certainly we probably love the show. There's a key difference, though, between Black Mirror and the Twilight Zone, in that I think the Twilight Zone is more aspirational. There were certainly some dark endings and stuff like that, but whereas Black Mirror is pretty much part of its signature is the bleakest ending of that you can possibly think up that's going to be the ending. The Twilight Zone was, as I said earlier, deeply humanistic, and seeking equality among people, and seeking a kind of a better world. And I think it's one of the reasons that it endures is that it's heartfelt, and it's not ultimately at the end of the day bleak. And that's another thing that I love about it.
Also, the difference between Black Mirror and the Twilight Zone had to do with the moment. I mean, during the 50s, we have a lot of economic growth, and the problem, Black Mirror is in a way, dystopia. It's always about dystopians, futures, like criticism. And I have noticed a lot that we're living a very maybe pessimistic world. I mean, nowadays, maybe because of the COVID, but before, I mean, we are afraid of what's going to happen, maybe because of the problems that we're seeing, climate change, the overuse of technology, the loss of identity. Well, again, we live in a post-cyberpunk era, and I think Black Mirror reflects that. Also, Charlie Brooker, it's very, he had before Black Mirror, I think a broadcast in the UK. It was about political satire. So in a way, the first 2 seasons of Black Mirror are more center of that. After,
the first one in particular, the very first episode,
yeah. It's actually it's about that, because then they changed because Netflix bought the show, so they have to adapt and do more like technology episodes instead of political satire. But I think the core, it's a very acid criticism to all this political situation. And again, we have the footprint of the author there. I mean, Charlie Brooker, it's more like ironic author. He wants to criticize through irony. On the other hand, Rod Serling was someone who's trying to see the bright side. That I think is it's a very important difference.
Maybe also the show, it's also like, I think that Twilight Zone was thought to leave like a learning after every episode. Like you have an ending that makes you, today we learned that, child abuse is not good. Today we learned that, that racism is just when we make a phobic group of people go on to, there is like a sort of, how do you say moraleja? Like
it's
metaphor. No.
Yeah.
Their morality, but they're of the best kind in that they don't tell you what to think. They leave you thinking, and not hitting you over the head with an opinion. They're more subtle than that. And that was another about Rod Serling's writing. And like I said, I'm always interested to talk to people who saw Psycho in the movie theater. What were people screaming during the shower scene? And talking to people who watched the Twilight Zone growing up, they all say the same thing, which is it was water cooler TV. You talked about, did you see the Twilight Zone last night? And it's because it worked on all these levels. They were high concept, but they were also dealing with really deep, cutting edge themes and beautifully acted. It's great shows. And I hope young people today are still watching the show. It's still TV.
I think that people screamed when they saw the Psycho on the first day of the release of the premiere. I really think so. And I think people screamed when they saw Jaws, and I think people screamed when they saw The Exorcist. I think that there are shows that were meant to make you scream when you saw them for the first time.
Oh yeah, I saw The Exorcist in the theater a couple of times, and people were screaming, and a lot of people were leaving because it was
Yes.
too scary. In fact, I will say one of my formative moments was I was at a friend's house on a summer afternoon, and I was probably 10 years old, and the Twilight Zone was on, and it was the one called After Hours.
Yeah, the one where she wants to buy the ring.
And she sees a creepy lady, and then she's trying to find the creepy lady, and she says, there she is. Now she's a mannequin. And that moment scared the shit out of me. I was with other kids, and I did not want to continue watching. It was just too scary, and I had to find a reason to get out of the room. I can't remember why I started telling the story, but I can't remember my point. But it was
what it generates in you.
Yeah, and it is also, you have to admire, and that's one of the things I thought about Star Trek. There's so many different kinds of stories with so many different tones. Some are frightening, some are funny, some are have less fantasy in them. Others take place in outer space. It's science fiction, it's fantasy, it's horror, and you never really knew what you were going to get week to week. Imagine watching it at the time. Every episode was different. And that's what I liked about Star Trek.
It's interesting also to analyze what happened after, because now there's a lot of anthology shows. I remember an Amazing Stories. They try to, replicate the concept of an anthology show, but although a lot of them, they were like good, like Amazing Stories, they haven't reached that quality level. And I always wonder why.
Look, I'm sure anthology shows are really hard to do. I was talking with somebody who was an executive at Apple TV, and he was telling me about the Amazing Stories remake that they did. And he was just saying, I'm never doing an anthology show ever again. They're just, you have to think new and original and great every week, but you're starting from scratch. You're not building on existing characters or anything. And I didn't see the new Amazing Stories that Apple aired. Did you guys? I missed it. If it worked or not. And the original Amazing Stories was great. John Williams theme, wonderful openings, and there were some good episodes. And there were some good episodes around the same time of the Twilight Zone reboot in the 80s. There were actually some really good episodes. It's never got to the level of. I always thought if the Twilight Zone reboot should have been shot in black and white. No?
Maybe.
Or maybe not.
I think that maybe, I'm a huge fan of watching, maybe, for example, I saw, how do you say, Eager's movie, El Faro, ¿cómo se llama? The Lighthouse.
Yeah.
And it was shot in black and white. And I think that there is something that generates inside me watching a movie that it's black and white. It was filmed with an old filmic, and I thought that the movie was so real and so intense, and made me give this. I had this sense of isolation when I watched the film, that maybe it was also accentuated because it was black and white, because it was filmed like in the old school days, and the result was this sense of anguish and despair that I felt when I saw it. And so maybe we want to see things in color because we are used to it. But the thing that black and white film also generates in us is another thing. There are also, that there are short stories for little boys and girls that are some pages in black and white and some pages in color. Because in black and white, you get to use your imagination in more ways that maybe if you are given the thing, like maybe if you're given the color, you just have to watch the color. But in black and white, there is like this sort of flip that you have for more imagination to come through when you're watching the story. And that is pretty interesting. And I compare it to what I watched in black and white nowadays, and I think that there is a good effect. And that might be something good when you think about making a reboot of the Twilight Zone, because I think that there was never a good reboot of the Twilight Zone if we compare it to the 50s, 60s Twilight Zone. I mean, that was the Twilight Zone. Then we have this sort of melancholy that we want to just prolongate the Twilight Zone, but I think that maybe it was done over there. And maybe we can accept that there are some things, like today, like we were speaking about Black Mirror, we say, okay, this is the result of the Twilight Zone. Maybe we don't have to bring again the Twilight Zone, because the Twilight Zone is there and it's alive and it was made there. And sometimes I'm not so sure that making like a reboot is a good thing.
Well,
like sometimes it's scary.
I'm sure that the Jordan Peele Twilight Zone, you brought, I haven't seen it, but you brought up that he's bringing his own interpretation. And I think there is value in that, and whatever.
Yes, of course.
He's employing, they're temporary. But I also think, I agree with you, that there are some things that are so classic and still so in the conversation that you probably, like when Gus Van Sant remade Psycho, I was just like, why are you remaking this movie?
Yes.
What is the point? And I never really understood that. Like, I don't think you should remake Jaws. People still watch.
Never.
People
Please.
watch Jaws, not need a reboot of Jaws.
Just watch Sharknado if you want to watch a shark flying in the air. But no, Sharks was done in the 70s and it won't be done again. Sorry, but no.
Agreed. And one could argue that, you know, the Twilight Zone, it's still on.
Yes.
Talked about, books are still being written. You know, we have a Twilight Zone marathon on every New Year's Day here on the TNT. I can't remember what channel it is, where they show Twilight Zone for 24 straight hours.
You know what?
Well,
I think that there are some movies and some stories that are immoral. They have no time. Like, for example, when I spoke about The Exorcist, for example, for me, it's Alien. Alien, for me, it's one of the best movies that was done until the day. And it's a movie that I watched today, and it's not old. And Psycho, it's not old. I can watch Psycho like 50 times in a row, and I can still watch the beauty of the show. And I think that that is very interesting, because maybe there are some things that are immortal, and they are, here we say, atemporal, with no time.
Timeless.
Timeless. I think that they don't grow old, because there are some things that grow old. Maybe we see Evil Dead, it grows old. We all love Evil Dead.
The black and white is part of that too. You know, Hitchcock chose to shoot Psycho in black and white, partly because of budget, but he also because it was a black and white movie. It needed to be in black and white. It would not have worked as well in color. You know, imagine seeing a colorized version of Twilight Zone. I'm surprised no one's tried it. That's Jay Lee.
Well, maybe there are some people that do, but with films. I mean, it's an inspiration that we have for modern cinema nowadays, fantasy and horror and sci-fi. I think that get along with most of the episodes that we know, like the most popular ones. And we can see a lot of references in movies, like, for example, I'm sorry, but Poltergeist it's the remake of the episode of the Twilight Zone of the girl gone missing.
Little girl lost.
Yes. And I think that's...
I think it was, I read a story that it might have been Spielberg who was pitching a reference to the Twilight Zone, like that was drawn because even then Twilight Zone was influencing young filmmakers, you know.
Yes, and there are some people that say that Spielberg filmed Poltergeist and not
Well,
produced
that's
it.
a whole other. Do another episode of your show about that.
Yeah, we have to see the story behind Poltergeist, and because there's some people that say that there's something strange going on with who filmed what, because that year came out, I think it was E.T. and Poltergeist the same year, and Spielberg was with both of them. But I think that there was a lot of Spielberg in the filming of Poltergeist. Maybe we have to.
I worked with a camera assistant, a focus puller, a couple years ago, who was the focus puller on Poltergeist. So I got his opinion of what was happening. He was
my
there.
God!
But
who was there?
I don't think it's my business to talk about. But there are scenes in Poltergeist, you're like, oh, there are scenes that clearly Spielberg staged. But I think it was a kind of a collaboration, if anything.
Yeah.
But Tobe Hooper and Spielberg were both Twilight Zone fans. I mean, of course, Spielberg produced the Twilight Zone, the movie. I don't think he picked a great episode to remake, kick the can. But, and by the way, the best reboot ever of a Twilight Zone episode has to be Nightmare at 20,000, George Miller's interpretation of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which I just watched recently because I'm doing an airplane terror sequence in a project I'm doing, and it is 10 minutes long, and it is just brilliant. And it's the rare case where he actually it's just great. It's even better than the original in some ways. It's just terrifying.
Maybe because the monster of the original is not that.
That's the problem. It's that big teddy bear. You know, it's like.
It was like a Bigfoot on the wing.
It wasn't great. but Shatner was great. He sold it.
I think that there are that there are some people that made like an addition of a mixture between the first one and the one of the 80s, and they stuck together some scenes from the first episode of 20,000 Feet and the one in the 80s. I saw it and it was really good. I say, oh, look at this. So they took away some parts, and maybe the monster was the other monster, and it worked a little bit better. And
that's cool. I'll have to find that. That's amazing. And they redid it. The Jordan Peele one redid it as Nightmare at 30,000 Feet. 20,000 feet and 30,000 feet are still both pretty scary. But I'm curious to see what they did.
If you're in a flying can in the middle of the air, it's really scary, everything that's going on there.
You say something very interesting, Clara, when you say that the problem that we are rebooting things that maybe they shouldn't be rebooting. I don't think someone would dare to, for example, do a remake of The Exorcist, that nobody will dare, or maybe, I don't know. But I think there's an episode in the Twilight Zone, the one that's a man traveled through time and visit the town when he spent his childhood. And in the end, his own father that he discovers his son, but older, he said, stop looking at the past. I mean, start looking forward. And I think if Rod Serling would be alive right now, he would say that to all these content creators and storytellers.
I don't know. He really liked the spotlight, I think. He would like to make it immortal.
But that's very. I think it's very true. I mean, I think Gene Roddenberry would say the same thing. That's why the second Star Trek series he created, he set it even more in the future. Like it was all about looking forward. And yeah, I think so. I mean, the Twilight Zone was a true original. There'll never be anything like it.
Hmm.
And
So
there's some good TV on now.
yes, yes, I think that's the idea, and that's the challenge to find new stories, to not try to remake or reboot, um, but to, there's a lot of directors right now, they're trying to be someone from the past, like they're in the horror genre here, for example, Latin America. They want to be Cronenberg, they want to be Carpenter, the new generation, instead of searching for something new, instead of, hearing their own voices, finding their own voices. And I think that's the idea. Ray Bradbury says once that you cannot defeat your masters, your teachers. Don't be like them. Be yourself, because you cannot beat them. I mean, Ray Bradbury was thinking about Bernard Shaw. I cannot be as good as Bernard Shaw, but I can be Ray Bradbury. And that's a wonderful advice he did to new writers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that you're right. And I think that maybe, in my opinion, there wasn't really a reboot that I really enjoyed as much as the original film. But there was one that Fede Alvarez, a guy here from, a director from Uruguay, made of Evil Dead reboot.
Oh yeah, that was scary.
So he made something really interesting, because he said, okay, Sam Raimi said, we are going to make this reboot. But he said, okay, but I'm going to make my own film that it's not exactly a reboot, but it's going to, okay, we're going to take some things about the original story, but I'm going to take away the comedy, and I'm going to make it with my style. So that was a very good reboot, because it was really scary, and it was really gore, and it was really different from what I saw on Evil Dead. That maybe, I think, when we were speaking about timeless films, that is not the case of Evil Dead. I think it's a beautiful classic, and I loved it. But now if I see it, it's old, and it hasn't aged that well. So I say, well, this is a very good form of reboot, because it's not exactly the same, but it's a new thing with the I think the universe that Sam Raimi created with Evil Dead. And that is very interesting, because I think there are some ways to bring back old school film or old school stories. But I think that the way of telling them is the way of this original voice. Not trying to make again the film, but trying to make something different with the same universe. Maybe, I don't know.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
There's a problem with your sound, I think.
My sound?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
it's
hear there. Tell me,
Can you-
yes, Martin here says that that was terrible, what I said. And Sam Raimi hit a unique concept. It's true. I'm saying that it's true that I love Sam Raimi. I love Evil Dead. I'm a huge fan. I watched those films like 70 times each. The reboot changed the concept and was not as special. I think it's not that it was not as special. I think it was different. And it was a different way to bring an old film. Because I don't think that maybe what Sam Raimi did was going to be doable again in a good way. So I think that, for example, Poltergeist, the reboot, I didn't like it. I loved Poltergeist, the first film. But the reboot, I think that maybe there are some things that maybe could be better. And I don't know if I'm making myself...
I know what you're saying. By the way, you should do an episode about the original Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, because those were hugely influential films. You know, filmmakers like the Coen brothers and Barry Sonnenfeld and the cinematographer Bill Pope and other people really were profoundly influenced by Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi is a much more influential filmmaker than people realize. And I know this by talking to these different filmmakers who worshipped him, who worked with him, who worked under him. And especially look at the early Coen brothers work, some of which was shot by Barry Sonnenfeld. These were people who came up with Sam Raimi, and the early Coen Brothers movies are like Sam Raimi movies. They have
I
a
think
similar kind of you know, style to them. You should do an episode about that. By the way, before I forget, I wanted to mention there's a great Argentinian anthology movie called Wild Tales, which I think would make a great TV show. It's a great movie. It's a great anthology film. If you, I don't know how people can find it, but you guys know the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you talked to Demian Cifrón, the
No.
director?
He should have
Oh.
won the Oscar. I'm going to just
You know
say
what?
it, but it was a beautiful film.
COVID happened and everything.
Oh.
It just, no one, you know, communication stopped. But I really love that movie. I hope he does another one.
He's
too.
in the United States right now, so he will do. He's working.
By the way, somebody just mentioned the remake of Suspiria, which
Oh.
I absolutely. Now, look, people are going to hate me for saying this, but I loved the remake.
I also love the remake.
I thought the remake, it's a great dance movie, but the remake is its own thing. It is its own thing. Make no mistake. It uses components of the original. It is not the original. It is something else, and it deals with some different story points, but it's an amazing piece of filmmaking and horror, and I loved it. Now, I think you and I were probably the only people who saw it. And I feel bad. I dragged a couple friends of mine to see it, and I'm like, they're in hell right now. They hate this. It's not for everybody, but I just thought it was great. And if you can separate yourself from Argento's version as a jumping off point, you can really appreciate it for what it is.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. And I was going to mention Suspiria, because I think that there is something very interesting with what also Adrian said. The thing about not trying to make exactly the same film, but just make maybe your special film in this universe. I mean, nobody's going to be Sam Raimi again. Nobody's going to make Evil Dead again. I think that it was already made, and it cannot be made again. It would be like maybe useless to do it again. But Suspiria, to me, it was like beautiful to watch, because I'm a huge fan of Dario Argento. I love Giallo, and I think that my best film of Argento is Phenomena. It's another film, but Suspiria is really beautiful, but it has aged, and maybe bring something of Giallo to today is very special to me.
Oh yeah,
as a huge fan.
And the remake is a Giallo film, and yeah, I agree. There are cases.
But as you said, it's not the same film. So this is really interesting, because we say we're going to watch the reboot of Suspiria, but it's not the same film. I watched other characters, and the development of each one and what they transmitted to me was different. And I think it was really amazing, the reboot that they made of Suspiria, because it's another film, as you said it. I mean, everything is so beautiful in the film. The music, maybe the music is the more old school Giallo theme that they have, but with all the technology advances, we are seeing a Giallo film made today. We are not seeing a film in the 60s, 70s. We are seeing a film that was filmed two years ago.
And yet feels very much like Polanski shot it. It feels very, it feels, I don't know. I loved it. I loved it. It did not do well. Did not do well.
Why? I mean, why?
It's just too weird.
Films.
The movie is just, it's like, it's epic. It's a dance movie. It's 3 hours long. It has just the horrific violence coming out of the last half hour is just the bloodiest thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's a crazy movie in the best way. I loved it. But anyway, we get off topic of it.
Yeah. Well, well, there's something interesting about the Twilight Zone that you would like to add about.
I would just say, first of all, thanks for including me in this conversation. I could talk about this stuff for forever, and I just hope people continue to watch the show, and I hope that it's in the conversation 50 years from now.
Wait, here's some. I want to read some of the comments that people are saying, because it's really interesting when people start speaking and they start.
Someone says Brannon it's timeless or something like that.
I think
did you read that?
No, the Omega Man is a Richard Matheson book. Is I Am Legend.
Yeah, it's based. That's right. It was based on I Am Legend.
Yes,
Charlton Heston.
Yes, and that book is amazing. I read it and I really recommend it. And it's really strange because that's what inspired the zombie genre, even though it's a vampire thing.
It's kind of a vampire. It was the first mainstream story that gave a biological scientific reason that behind these zombie vampire, which was really, really innovative and made it seem real. Yeah.
Well, that's what Danny Boyle made when he made 28 Days Later, when he really introduced it to films. Because first, when we saw the first zombie films, like The Return of the Living Dead, we really had like a sort of metaphysical way of the zombies coming back to life. But in 2002, when 28 Days Later started and was released, it was the first time when they twisted it with the biological weapon kind of genre. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So now we're speaking about a lot of things.
I'm looking for the cord to my phone because my phone's about to die. And so we don't get cut off here. Here we are.
No, thank you for being with us. I mean, if you want to join us another time to talk about, we will love to.
Anytime. I love talking.
I love talking.
I love talking about any kind of movie, but particularly movies and
classic films.
Classic films and
the movies that made us.
The movies that made us, and certain TV shows.
I will. I told you that a friend of ours, of Clara and me, that's a director, Gabriel Grieco. He's a huge fan of your work. He's doing his fourth film, sci-fi. Apparently, he has done some tribute to your work. He told me that. And he's going to travel to LA, so I'm going to give him some alfajor so you can have more alfajor. Yeah. Did you enjoy it?
I'd love to meet him and bring me some more treats from your country.
You have to try dulce de leche.
Yes.
Dulce de leche. Yeah. I will send
stuff. We don't have that here.
Don't worry. So, Brannon, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Clara.
Great meeting you.
Well, we will continue with this conversation. We do this every week with Clara, and we will if you want to participate later.
I'm just curious as a viewer, what's your topic next week?
We always talk about the topic that we're going to make on a Sunday, like during the week. And maybe we read a book and we say, okay, like I'm really obsessed. Right now I'm like in a Richard Matheson phase. I'm like rereading all of his work. And maybe last month was Lovecraft and I was like obsessed with him. I get really obsessed and I'm a huge nerd. So maybe I just spend the night reading and until blood comes out of my eyes. So then I send a message to Adrian and I say, Adrian, you know what? Let's make this theme.
Yeah.
In the worst possible psychosis, and we arrange a live.
Cool.
Yeah. Uh, so, well, I'll inform you, and we'll see, and we will continue this because the idea is, yeah, to tell people about all these things that they really they need to keep alive, right? I mean, like the Twilight Zone and the small, even in literature, there's a lot to keep alive. That's beautiful shows. And so thank you very much, both.
Yep, thank you, guys.
Keep
Thanks for all the people
and
anyone out there who's watching.
hey, guys. See you. Bye-bye.
Wait, I'm going to just say one more time. I love Sam Raimi. I don't want anyone to think that I don't love Sam Raimi. Please.
Oh, yeah. No, that wasn't your point.
It was another thing. I love him. I love all of his films, and I'm waiting to see Doctor Strange and the Multi-Universe of Madness. So, yeah.
Cool.
Do not mistake me.
All right, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye, guys.